Hi, everybody. I hope you all are doing well. Um, I will be doing this via Zoom or YouTube for the next week or two until everything is lifted and we can come back into your wonderful space. I hope everyone is doing well. Today, we're going to be traveling to South Korea. It's a place that I find intriguing, especially during these times when there is so much buzz about what's going on in South Korea as far as its Academy Award winning films, the food that has hit America, as well as a lot of other things that we'll explore today. South Korea is a top country as far as technology is concerned, as most of you know. And as I say, now they can put into their category one of the finest filmmaking countries in the world. So without further ado, let's get to the share screen. If you give me just a moment here, I'm going to get right up to where we need to be. And I go on to our screen here back at my office in Morristown and get right into South Korea itself and the slides. Some of these are my photos. As you know, I am a photographer and I take many of my photographs that I share with you, of course. So we'll start with our first slide, which of course is the lovely map, the lovely flag of South Korea. You can see the yin and the yang up in the front. I have a pointer that I'm going to use. So let me get to that pointer. Right here is the yin yang in the middle. A lovely part of the South Korean flag. An interesting past, as you know, not only with the separation or the dividing of the two countries, North and South Korea, but so much more as well that we'll discuss as we go through our slides. I'll be looking a little bit over this way. I have two screens that I work with. Of course, this one is straight on, but this one allows me to work on the big screen, and it's a little bit easier from my perspective. So if you don't mind, I'm going to be looking this way, but I'm actually looking right at all of you. What we see right here is the Academy Award winning film called Parasite. Parasite was a fascinating film. I saw it with my family in 2021, and it really deals with this incredible story of a South Korean family, a poor South Korean family, grappling with the lack of opportunities in that country and the rising gap between the classes of the upper and the lower classes. This is a still that I took from the film, and this, of course, shows the family that is really struggling with the day-to-day or lack of day-to-day opportunities. You can see pizza boxes in the back. So what they do is they put together pizza boxes for their living. But of course, for the young man on the left-hand side and the young woman on the right-hand side, that's not going to be enough for them. And they're going to figure out a way to sort of break through and really in the most crazy way, find a way to break down their barriers and rise up in the classes. Of course, it's not that easy, and they meet with a whole bunch of craziness. I urge you all to see the film. It's not an easy film, but it really does expose for us the issues, social issues of a rising South Korean economy that, of course, is leaving a good portion of its population behind. Here's a photograph of the director. for Parasite, winner of Best Picture. It's the first time that a foreign film has actually won Best Picture. So that's a feather in their cap. And then, of course, this is a photograph of Yoon. Yoon is a wonderful South Korean actress who actually won the Oscar for Minari. Minari is a great film. You can see the Oscar in the background. A great film about a South Korean family, immigrants that moved to Arkansas in the middle of the country and what they go through. And it's really a great film. Once again, I saw it just the other day and found out after I saw it that Yoon had won Best Supporting Actress. You can see by my map the Korean Peninsula. The bottom left-hand side of the southwestern part of the country is a series of hundreds of islands that make up the southern and western part of the border of the country. Here is the dividing line between, of course, what is North Korea and South Korea. North Korea is considered the poorest nation on earth. Haiti and North Korea hold that title. The poorest nation on earth. They have the highest malnutrition rate in the world. They have a rising starvation rate, unfortunately, compared with their brothers in the South, in South Korea, which is one of the most technologically advanced nations on earth, one of the highest standards of living on earth, one of the longest life expectancies on earth, one of the highest ratio of person to education, primary, secondary degrees, even tertiary degrees. And just to the north, everything there is opposite, which makes for such a fascinating delve into these two worlds of the same, in other words, culturally the same people, but of course, so different as a nation. Here you can see the southern part of Korea, or what we know as South Korea. You can see the Japanese Sea on the east, right? The series of islands that I talked to you about. I'll show you some photos as we go through here of the islands. It's quite beautiful, actually. You can see it's a small country. Seoul is a huge city, 12, 13 million people. But if I go back one, you can see that the two areas together, it's not a very large area, although when you divide it in half, it's even that much smaller. So land is precious. And of course, you can see here how mountainous the country is. So the plateaus are only on the western parts here. And most of the eastern areas are very, very rugged and very mountainous. It's an old history, of course, that dates back 5,000 years. These are photos I took from the museum. The Korean language, the written language, beautiful symbols, very much like Chinese. This is a library that sits in South Korea. It houses the oldest books written in Korean. Beautiful monastery, of course. And as most of you are familiar with the division, which was sort of a war, a proxy war between the Soviets at the time after World War II, sort of dividing the country and then trying to reunite it, of course, with American involvement, but unsuccessful. And it remained two countries, North Korea and South Korea. And this is the war memorial for that war. Modern day leader that sort of democratized South Korea. And of course, Seoul and South Korea by 2010 had really entered into the Western world. Even by that time, the economy was rising, but between 2010 and 2020, the economy took off, and it is today one of the strongest economies in the world. Definitely a force to reckon with. You can see our president here, Barack Obama, our ex-president, I should say, Barack Obama. And that took place, of course, in Seoul, which was quite a big deal, the G20, for the Korean people. It's a mountainous country, and it's made up of beautiful waterfalls and parks, lots of very lush scenery, very much like parts of our country in the Northeast. Lots of trees. The climate is cold, or similar, I should say, to New Jersey. North Korea is even more cold, but of course, that's the way it is both in the South and the North. The North gets a lot of snow. The South gets snow in the mountains as well. This is a beautiful urban park in Seoul. You can see that the river runs right through the center of the city. If I go back just a few, I don't know if I have it here. Yeah, you can see a little bit of the river that kind of runs through Seoul. And then, of course, instead of diverting the water, like Denver with the Platte River, for example, they allow it to run through the middle of the town, and it becomes this beautiful park. Government buildings. See the Korean dressed in full regalia, costume. You can see the mountains, and really the cities are pretty much engulfed with mountains on most of the cities. It's a very densely populated country. This is beautiful Busan. I'm curious, I would have loved to have spoken to some of the folks that have been to Korea. It's a really intriguing place. Cheon Grand Bridge. And there you can see in the background the snow-capped mountains. This is a photo in winter. Again, the density of the cities, building all the time. They're building. Here you can see the cranes out on the horizon. All these types of buildings that you see here are what's being built currently. So lots and lots of building going on a regular basis in South Korea. It's the border. We'll talk about that in just a minute. March 1st celebration day. You can see everyone dressed up in their black and white uniforms, and of course, waving the Korean flag. There's our monks, Buddhist monks. And then, of course, the Korean War, which so many of you, unfortunately, are probably familiar with firsthand. A long war, quite a brutal war, of course, and really a proxy war between the Soviets and the Americans, and played out in between North and South Korea. North Korea is a authoritarian regime, as you know, made famous really, or made the headline so much with Donald Trump, feeling that he could sort of break through with the dictator. Of course, nothing came of that. The South is a heavily militarized country still, as is the North. They have one of the largest standing armies in the world, basically because everyone goes into the military. But in South Korea, they do also. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to, believe it or not, some of the issues regarding some of the pop groups that have come out of Korea and the military exemptions that they earn. You're supposed to go, or you're supposed to serve by 28 years old. In South Korea, we have a very good friend who went into the military, and he sits on the fence about that. He feels whether you be famous and rich, you should still go into the military, like countries like Israel and Denmark, where everyone serves. You don't want to sort of allow too many exemptions because people are wealthy or can afford it or are popular. Let's say the musicians, there's these pop groups. But getting back to the issue of the military, it's an issue in South Korea, and they are forever on edge with the movements of the North Korean dictator and his need to sort of flex his muscles and show his strength with the Korean people. So it's really quite a back and forth, a game of nerves. I will say that the North Korean and South Korean leaders do meet, and they do have dialogue. The people are of the same culture. They're all Koreans, so they're not that far off from each other, but that's on a social level. From a political level, of course, it's a whole different world. And as well as I do, that North Korea is a real problem because they do have the ability to weaponize and create nuclear arms for their country, which could be really problematic for that part of the world, especially when you're dealing with China. And then on our side, Japan and South Korea. So that has to be sort of kept under control. And here, as I say, is a photograph of the border. The South and North Korean border is the most heavily militarized border on Earth. There's more guards, mines, minefields, guards, soldiers than any other border on the face of the Earth. This is looking north into North Korea. And they stand there for hours and hours and hours. Here's the meeting between the two. And as I say, there is even a back and forth between the two countries as well, between the peoples. They go from North Korea, from North Korea to South Korea to work, and then they go back at night. So there is that kind of free flow of workers, if you will, that go back and forth between the two. And of course, South Korea's president with Vladimir Putin. Disputed territory, of course. Now we're talking about the creeping Chinese political ambitions, or creeping Chinese political ambitions as they look at these, we can call them rocks, if you will, but these are rocks that are very much disputed and very much looked at by the South Koreans as theirs. The Chinese claim it's theirs. And if the Chinese own the rock, they can also build things around the rock, like Air Force bases and terminals and things like that. So these are the issues that are really very close to the political situation today, both with America, with South Korea, and China. So a lot of back and forth between these three countries, making sure that China doesn't have free access to do what they want to do in order to extend their arm in the South Asian Sea. As I said, they have a very large military. They have one of the largest standing armies in the world. Everyone at 18, males go into the military. The way it works in South Korea is that you have to go in by 28. So you can defer for a few years if you're in school or whatever it is. Excuse me, but by 28, you have to serve. South Korean armaments. This is a Rotem. Actually, I think Rotem, that actually might be, yeah, I'm not sure actually. I thought it was something else, but I'll skip that for now. Here's the South Korean Air Force. So they are a technology obsessed country, very much like Japan, also very, very focused on their technology and their technology base. Children also in South Korea tend to be very focused on the technology of the world, the games that can come off of a cell phone or that you can play on a cell phone or on a computer. Very much part of the South Korean culture and the upbringing of the children who go to game clubs, so to speak, at night, where we might go to a bar, they'll go to a game club and things of that nature. So very much focused on the technology hub of their country. I included this photo really so you can get an idea of the density. If you look in the background, these buildings, I got claustrophobic. You can really sense how close together they are. And actually, if you here down below also, it's massive blocks. But if you see the movie Parasite, which, as I say, it's not the easiest movie to watch. It's quite violent at times, but they do very much show at the beginning of the film, how the squalor of the urban landscape is becoming more and more. They have a high percentage of their population that live in urban environment or cosmopolitan. So that is an issue that they're watching on a daily basis. In other words, how crowded the cities are getting. High-speed trains. Monorail systems that go around the outskirts of the cities, and then they transfer on to regular trains. So very important as far as their ability to transport people is through public transportation. This is an LG screen. I actually have an LG screen that I work off of at times. And this is a very, very high definition. It's considered one of the highest definition televisions in the world. And this was part of the technology show. And she was sort of pointing out not only how incredible the screen is, but how thin it is. You can see over here, right? It's the thinness of a penny. They have a new screen now, LG, that actually rolls out. So it goes inside a canister, and then it rolls up automatically. And it's a big 48-inch screen. And it's quite amazing, actually, that the technology is there to bend the, well, I guess it's not glass. I'm not even sure what material it is, but that it can roll up and roll out of a holder in order for you to see the television. But these LG screens are the best in the world. Huge satellite industry. Of course, most of their satellites are used for communication. They have launched quite a few, and they basically they go up into space. The top part of the capsule right here shoots off, and then they have these satellites that float around or orbit, I should say, and that allows internet and power signals, television, things of that nature to bounce off of these satellites and back into South Korea. A very sophisticated satellite industry. And again, the obsession with robots and technology is of the utmost in South Korea. They have one of the highest levels of education of any country in the world. They're in the top 3. In other words, the International Survey of Schools, which is this, I think it's every 5 years, sort of ranks school systems. And it is interesting that the 2 top countries are Finland and South Korea. And what is also interesting about that is that Finland has the smallest class sizes of any country in the world, 10 per teacher. And South Korea has the highest, 33 or 34 per one teacher in a class. And yet the level of education, the ranking of the students are the highest in the world from both these countries, even though the ratio of student to teacher is so dramatic and so dramatically different. So it goes to show that it's not really about how many students are in the class in South Korea. It is about the students sort of guiding and helping other students to obtain the level, teachers obtain the level, so everyone rises together, so to speak. Also, the teachers are paid very well in South Korea. Now, things are changing. As I say, these last survey was done in 2015. Things are changing. I'm not saying that South Korea is going to drop. It's probably not going to. And by the way, the United States is 27 on the list. So although we used to be 1, 2, 3, we've been dropping steadily over the years. One of the reasons, by the way, why that Build Back Better plan was seen by many as so crucial to competing on our global economy is because it teaches, it's mandatory preschool, basically. So in South Korea, students, children start going to school at a very young age. I think it's 3.5 or 4 years old. So their formal education starts 1.5 years earlier than ours. And that Head Start program is seen as pretty important. They also very pressured their students. So I will say that it comes, at a price, and they do have an issue with stress and anxiety among their students, say, if they don't get into the college of their choice. But it still ranks as the top school system on earth, along with Finland, public education up through 12th grade. And of course, Einstein, as you can see here, is revered by the students and that kind of, genius professor, so to speak. But here you have a robot, of course, with his head on it. The music is very similar to what you have in Japan and China, as far as the instruments and the notes that are not Western, but Eastern. Temples. So in 2008, the first bibimbap restaurant opened up in New York City. And since then, Korean food has simply exploded. No other way to put it, has simply exploded. Where sushi was the dominant Asian food between 2000 and 2010, now the dominant Asian food is South Korean. And leading the way is bibimbap. I don't know if you've ever had it. You can certainly ask the folks at your lovely community if they would ask a chef to make it, but it's very difficult. if you don't have the ingredients. And I'm not sure it's for everyone. My wife is not crazy about bibimbap. I love it. It's clean food. You can see noodles, eggs, kimchi, which is a big part of it, or kimchi, I should say, a big part of the Korean diet. Lettuce, seaweed. We have in Highland Park, which is not too far from you all, something called H Mart, which is the biggest Korean supermarket in America. And it's tremendous. And they have all kinds of different dishes from South Korea, bibimbap being one of them. And it's really, really an amazing supermarket. So if you can get your children or your grandchildren to take a ride with you one day and take you down to an H Mart, it's quite something. It really is a cultural experience walking through their food stores. This is what they call K-pop. K-pop is the explosion of South Korean all boy or all boy or all girl bands. And like a lot of the American and British boy and girl bands of the 1990s, South Korea now sort of leads that. And some of their bands have just exploded. They are worldwide phenomenons. And this is once again pushing South Korea into a new realm as far as its cultural importance throughout the world. Not just with movies and not just with food, but now, I should say, not just with food and not just with movies, but also with music and these bands. There's a boy band, girl band, of course. Also very, very important and such an important part of the Korean culture. Like the Japanese, they're big on baseball. Martial arts, of course, this is Taekwondo. Taekwondo. And you can see the gentleman jumping up, kicking and breaking the wood. This is a formal competition we were at. Somebody said, you should go if you want to really get on the inside here and see what South Korean culture is all about. But anyway, these are competitions. You can see down below, the two gentlemen are fighting down here. So all these different kinds of things happening at once. And of course, this gentleman is holding the board as these two gentlemen sort of push each other while this gentleman is kicking and breaking the board. Beautiful foliage. As I say, the temperature is very much like New Jersey. So you have the all foliage and colors that are really beautiful. Shrine, another temple. So here you can see very much like our Japanese lecture, or a lecture about the artistry of nature and landscape. South Korea also holds that very close to their hearts, as far as, say, the pagodas and the temples and the landscape, the trees that are planted. The foliage, this is a Japanese maple, but also Japanese maples in South Korea are revered. And this is springtime when they start to turn colors, and they blend with the landscape in such this beautiful way. You can see the tourists here. I shouldn't even say it's tourists. I don't know. I mean, they're mostly South Koreans, but still coming to see the shrine, coming to see the trees, the foliage, the landscape. Quite interesting. It's the river we showed you earlier. I showed you earlier. Did I miss one? No. Okay. Sorry. There we go. This is an interesting tradition. You can see these are locks, keys, locks, and you write something on it, and then you have to give the key, right? And then the person that you give the key to has to find the lock that that opens. And then, of course, he takes the little note home with him. Cherry blossoms. Beautiful, beautiful cherry blossoms. You can see the traditional costumes of the South Korean women. I believe that's on ice. That's kind of, actually, it's interesting because this is a neighborhood where the film Parasite was filmed in the beginning. It's also a very kind of a cool area of Seoul, very much like our Greenwich Village, very old, but lots of alleyways and stores. Very strong commitment to coal power, of course. That is a huge move that the South Koreans signed on to 2 years ago. And it really means the beginning of the end of the coal industry in South Korea. And by the way, America is also looking at that as a huge move, that they are now committed to alternative sources where they were very committed to coal. And also the United States coal community is looking at that. That happens to be a controversial issue with Joe Manchin, because as you know, Joe Manchin didn't want to vote for any of the legislation that would have enabled South Korea, Kentucky, West Virginia, to get funding to start to transfer a lot of the workforce away from coal and into things like solar power. West Virginia has a great workforce, but of course they're in an industry that is dying. But of course, Joe Manchin didn't vote for that, which is sort of ironic, because his state would have benefited by this focus on retraining of folks that were working in the coal industry to these alternative energy sources. But I guess he's, he's holding on to coal, and so he voted against it. But you can see the writing is on the wall. And if South Korea, which was dependent on coal, is now completely 100% committed to alternative energy sources, that's just a warning sign for the coal industry that it will be dead in probably about 10 years. This is the, first of all, this is BTS. This is the name of the band, a boy band. And they are at the sort of forefront of this exemption from service. They are extremely popular worldwide. They're making lots of money. They're pushing Korean culture in a positive way around the globe. Great dancers, great movers, great voices and singers and songwriters. And this exemption allows them to hold service until 28, which by some is seen as controversial, and others say, why not? They're helping with Korean culture around the world. You might as well give it to them. But military service, of course, is important because of the fear, the constant fear of North Korea, or threat posed by North Korea. A recent summit, this is where they discussed China. And so, so interesting. first of all, we see the density of Seoul. These are two young folks, that are obviously, this photograph was taken recently because of the pandemic. You can see the face masks and the rising gap, and really the lack of opportunities for the working class is a real issue. For the most part, the youth ages 20 to 29 years old voted Democratic or voted liberal. But lately, that's not the case. And one of the reasons is that after 30 years of them putting their vote behind the liberal or left-wing government, they haven't gotten anywhere. So little by little, they're starting to vote more on the right. And that's a little bit of a concern for the status quo, moving away from a sort of more left-wing leaning governments into, and especially the youth, into a more right-wing, who are promising them more opportunities. So this is something that we'll look at as the years go by, and definitely something that you should pay attention to when you listen to the news and listen to the new voting in South Korea. It might be something that we might find very interesting, actually, as we go forward with that. I also wanted to show you a little bit of South Korea, the interior of some of the places we visited. This is an outdoor bar, which is very, very nice. This is the interior of a home of an Airbnb. So they're all over the world, and everywhere we go, we stay in Airbnbs because we get to understand a little bit more about who, what, where. You can see their style is very minimalist. It's a large house, lots of books, but not overly furnished. It's sort of sparse, and that's very much Korean style. Matter of fact, once again, if you see the movie Parasite, you could see that the wealthy people's home is very sparse, very clean, open. This is not my photo. This is a famous South Korean designer, and you can see some of his incredible work. He's an award-winning designer in interior homes, and you can see he uses these sort of traditional South Korean woods and design with a modern take. This is one of his rooms. You can see the old wood, but with a modern glass and that kind of thing. Another room that he designed. And this is another Airbnb. And you can see, again, that sort of heavy wood, which is very common in South Korea. The lightness, the airiness. Unlike Japan, which you don't see much of this kind of wood, you do see it more in South Korea. But also, again, the openness, the airiness, the sparsely furnished rooms. And that's it. That's all we have for today. We will be back again soon. Next time we meet, whether it be virtually or in person, we're going to be working with some writing and introducing a poet, actually, to our discussion. So I hope you come out for that. In the meantime, and I'll turn back to my camera here. In the meantime, I really hope everyone stays well. I want to wish you all a really happy new year. 2022, I can sense, is going to be better than 2021. And that ain't such a hard bar to rise to, I should say. And I look forward to coming back in real soon. Be well, and Happy New Year.